What if just one broken part could ground your airplane with no replacement in sight? That's what happened to over 5,000 V-tail Bonanzas until a $500,000 prize changed everything. Today, Tom Turner from the American Bonanza Society tells the story behind the Ruddervator crisis and how it was finally solved. And during my updates, I'll tell you 3 stories about where a pilot overlooked a small detail. In one case, it led to a midair collision this past Saturday, and in the other 2 cases, I didn't fly with pilots this week because it would have been illegal. Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk general aviation. My name is Max Trescott. I've been flying for over 50 years. I'm the author of several books and the 2008 National Flight Instructor of the Year, and my mission is to help you become the safest possible pilot. Last week in episode 392, we talked with Cole Crawford from 4Flight about the company's latest innovation, dynamic procedures. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out at aviationnewstalk.com/392. And if you've just found our show, welcome. Now, if you would, in whatever app you're using to listen to us, touch either the subscribe key, or if you're using Spotify or the Apple Podcast app, the follow key so that next week's episode is downloaded for free. And my thanks to these people who've signed up in the past week to support Aviation News Talk. We have 4 new patron supporters, including Tony Aquila, Rich H., Kurt Anderson, and Herb Schulke. We also had a one-time donation from Michael Barham, and we had one from Andrew Benjamin, who wrote, I received my private at age 63. I've been listening to your podcast with my wife when we go driving and in the gym. She flies with me a lot. And as a result of your podcast, she's now at the point where she is pointing out red flags when you are describing a crash. When we go flying, she looks at any red flags that could be out there. I've learned a lot from your podcast, and sorry it took so long to donate. Now 66 years old. Well, thanks so much, Andrew, and it sounds like you've got a great partnership going. And if you'd like to sign up like Andrew did to help support the show, and you want to hear me read your name next week, go out now to aviationnewstalk.com/support. And just a quick reminder, Lightspeed is going to be giving away a Delta Zulu headset worth almost $1,300. But to win, you need to sign up. So go right now to aviationnewstalk.com/giveaway to see if you might win a free headset. And of course, whenever you buy a Lightspeed headset, Lightspeed will send a check to support Aviation News Talk, but only if you first go to this special link we've set up for you to get to their website. So when you buy a Lightspeed, go first to aviationnewstalk.com/Lightspeed, which will take you to their website where you can make your purchase. Coming up on the news for the week of July 21st, 2025, the light sport rules are expanding dramatically. The AOPA sweepstakes plane that you're probably hoping to win was damaged, and a Cessna 172 was hijacked. All this and more, and the news starts now. From AOPA.org, light sport rules expand dramatically. Pilots will be able to fly common aircraft such as the Piper Cherokee and Cessna 182 under sport pilot rules in about 3 months, the FAA announced at EAA Air Venture, Oshkosh in Wisconsin. Aircraft with maximum speeds of 250 knots calibrated airspeed, retractable gear, and constant speed propellers will now qualify as light sport aircraft under the highly anticipated Modernization of Special Airworthiness Certification, or MOSAIC, which dramatically expands the LSA category and sport pilot privileges. Aircraft with flaps down stall speeds up to 61 knots will be able to be certified as LSAs, and pilots will be able to operate aircraft with clean stall speeds of up to 59 knots under sport pilot privileges. The rule affects 3 major areas: pilots, aircraft, and maintenance. It will allow pilots to fly faster 4-seat airplanes under sport pilot privileges, removing the 1,320-pound maximum takeoff weight limit and raising the maximum level flight speed from 120 knots to 250 knots. Sport pilots will be able to fly aircraft with retractable landing gear or manual controllable pitch propellers with additional training and endorsements. Night operations will require additional training and endorsements, as well as basic med or third-class medical. The rule also opens up the light sport category to helicopters and electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Changes for sport pilots and light sport repairmen take effect 90 days after the publication of the final rule, with changes for LSA certification following a year after the publication. And from a press release from Skyrise, and they're the company that replaces the conventional controls in a helicopter with just a single control stick, they write, Mosaic allows fixed-wing and rotary-wing aircraft to be certificated as light sport aircraft and specifically outlines how airplanes, helicopters, and future vertical lift aircraft equipped with simplified vehicle operations, or SVO, like Skyrise, may only require 20 hours of pilot training. By decreasing the traditional training requirements by 50% when SVO is in use, the rule acknowledges the impact simplified controls have in reducing the complexity and increasing the safety of piloting. Mosaic also allows LSA certificate holders the ability to repair and instruct on helicopters with SVO, lowering the barriers to entry for maintenance professionals working with simplified smaller helicopters and enabling training pathways for future pilots. And by the way, if you want to hear about Skyrise, check out episode 339, in which I flew the Skyrise simulator, and you can find it at aviationnewstalk.com/339. From generalaviationnews.com, Apereo has released the Stratus 4 ADS-B receiver. Designed to enhance situational awareness and cockpit safety, Stratus 4 delivers flight data and real-time alerts so pilots are always ahead of the weather, traffic, and the unexpected. The Stratus 4 offers Apple Find My integration to help you find your Stratus if you lose it, a G-force meter, and a full-color touchscreen. The features on the touchscreen can be updated with a firmware release when new features are added. Additionally, it's designed to allow users to replace the rechargeable battery without the need for tools. This is the 5th generation of Stratus, introduced originally in 2012. It'll be available for shipping starting in September 2025. From avweb.com, AOPA sweepstake plane sidelined in runway excursion. The AOPA sweepstakes plane will not be at AirVenture this week, and initial reports were that untied shoelaces were to blame. Jordan Miller News reported that the refurbished Aviat Husky that AOPA is giving away went off the runway at Carroll County Airport in Carrollton, Ohio. The plane landed there on its way from Maryland in preparation for AirVenture, but fire department officials told the news publication that the pilot told them that his shoelaces became tangled in the rudder pedals and the plane went off the runway into the grass. There were no injuries, but the airplane's gear and left wing were damaged. It was also leaking fuel. But in a Facebook post yesterday, AOPA wrote, the pilot's foot was misplaced next to the left rudder pedal. No shoelace was involved. The propeller did not strike the ground and there was no engine damage. We will continue to provide updates as repairs get underway. From generalaviationnews.com, poor planning, inadequate training, cited as main reasons for loss of control accidents. On average, 4 planes crash each day in the U.S., with almost all of the aircraft involved being single-engine planes. 1 in 5 of those crashes were caused by in-flight loss of control, with nearly half of those accidents fatal. New research from University of Arkansas mechanical engineering assistant professor Nilakshi Majumdar investigates why in-flight loss of control occurs in GA and how pilots can prevent and recover from it. The paper, published in the latest issue of the Journal of Air Transportation, quote, is the first rigorous survey to ask surviving pilots why they experience in-flight loss of control and document the human factors that led to the incidents. University officials said, adding nearly 200 pilots completed the survey. The researchers noted that many pilots don't want to talk about loss of control incidents. Pilots are too scared to lose their license, Majumdar said. Errors mentioned by pilots include low airspeed, trying to take off with an overweight plane, incorrect use of autopilot, overlooking a checklist item, and not recognizing that the aircraft is in a spin. The most common cause of in-flight loss of control, Majumdar found, were poor planning that led to flying in severe weather and pilots recognizing too late that they were in a dangerous situation, which delayed or prevented corrective actions. Quote, what stood out for me was that around a quarter of the pilots talked about inadequate training for preventing loss of control scenarios, Majumdar said. Several of the pilots in the survey said they were never taught how to recover from out-of-control situations like spins and spirals. Even pilots who are taught how to recover from a spin may not have the skills to execute the recovery. Majumdar, a private pilot, believes that technology like flight simulators could be used to better train pilots how to avoid and recover from in-flight loss of control incidents. Flight simulators could also reduce the cost of training. From GeneralAviationNews.com, takeoff goes awry on significantly shorter runway than planned. And this comes from a final NTSB report. The pilot reported that density altitude conditions were increasing, but were within takeoff performance limits. During taxi to his planned departure runway at the airport in Elko, Nevada, he was informed that the runway was closed, so he chose to depart from a different runway about 4,400 feet shorter than originally planned. During takeoff, the Piper PA-28-140 did not have the performance necessary to attain rotation speed before the end of the runway, but the pilot did not abort the takeoff. He rotated the airplane 5 to 10 knots too slow and was unable to clear a fence off the departure end of the runway. The airplane sustained substantial damage to the wings and fuselage, while the pilot and his passengers sustained minor injuries. Probable cause: the pilot's failure to ensure adequate airplane performance before taking off from a significantly shorter runway than originally planned. From AOPA.org, Boeing trims pilot demand forecast slightly. Boeing predicts that the aviation industry will need 2.4 million new professionals over the coming 20 years, though expected demand for pilots was down a tick. The company's long-running pilot and technician outlook predicts 6,600 new pilots will be needed worldwide through 2044, down 2% from the 674,000 called for in the 2024 edition of the forecast. Boeing noted that 2/3 of the total number will be needed to replace existing personnel, and 1/3 will support commercial fleet growth. Most of the new jobs will operate single-aisle aircraft, and demand for staff in South Asia and Southeast Asia is expected to increase more than threefold. From AOPA.org, Van's Aircraft begins taking RV-15 orders. The company announced on July 24th that it's taking orders, with wing kits to be delivered first at a price of $19,650. The complete kit, which does not include an engine, propeller, or avionics, is priced at $85,000, more than the RV-14 at $62,000, and a little less than the RV-10 at $86,000. Wing kit deliveries are expected by the end of the year, with the tail, fuselage, and finishing kits to follow in 2026. Builders can mount a variety of engines ranging from 175 to 220 horsepower. The aircraft has a useful load of just over 900 pounds and a stall speed below 45 knots. The RV-15 will cruise at 140 knots and needs less than 400 feet for takeoff and landing. The RV-15 is the first high-wing airplane the Oregon company has produced since it was founded in 1972. The RV-15 drew crowds at EAA AirVenture 2025 even before the event officially opened. And also from AOPA.org, Stratus adventurer Baumgarten dies. Austrian extreme athlete Felix Baumgarten died on July 17th in a paragliding accident in Italy. He was 56. Baumgartner gained worldwide fame in October 2012 when he became the first human to break the sound barrier in freefall, jumping out of a helium-filled balloon in the stratosphere. The jump from an altitude of 128,100 feet, which was broadcast live, was called Project Stratus and sponsored by energy drink maker Red Bull. The ascent to the edge of space was then the highest manned balloon flight, and during his freefall, wearing a pressurized suit, Baumgartner reached a top speed of Mach 1.24. Baumgartner on July 17th lost control of his powered paraglider and crashed into a hotel pool in Porto Sant'Elpidio near the Adriatic seacoast. The accident, which killed him instantly, also injured a woman on the ground. Local media have reported that he had been feeling unwell and may have suffered a medical emergency during the flight. And finally from MSN.com, British Columbia pilot charged with hijacking and terrorism over Vancouver flight. A man charged with hijacking a light plane at Victoria International Airport and flying it to Vancouver had an ideological motive to disrupt airspace and seize control of the aircraft after threatening a flight instructor, according to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The spokeswoman for the Public Prosecution Service of Canada said a charge of hijacking had been filed in Richmond, BC, constituting a terrorist activity and a terrorist offense. A man with the same name as a former commercial airline pilot based in Victoria, and social media photographs of that man resemble the person arrested on the runway at Vancouver. Landings at Vancouver had been halted for more than half an hour as the Cessna 172 circled at a low altitude in the airspace above the airport. The Cessna, at the center of Tuesday's scare, had taken off just before 1 p.m. from Victoria Airport, where a spokesman said the aircraft was operated by the Victoria Flying Club. Flight radar shows it flew straight to Vancouver Airport before circling for about 25 minutes. Police said it landed at Vancouver about 1:45 p.m., and social media video show a swarm of police vehicles closing in on the taxiing plane before the bearded pilot emerges and walks backwards toward officers who train their weapons on him. NORAD confirmed that it scrambled F-15 fighter jets in response to the alleged hijacking. A recorded conversation between a Vancouver air traffic controller suggests the alleged hijacking may have been motivated by some type of protest. Well, that's the news for this week. Coming up next, a few of my updates in which we talk about how the details really matter. And later we'll talk with Tom Turner about a $500,000 prize that solved a Ruddervator problem. But first... And now here's a Headset Minute by Lightspeed with Derek Schmidt. Derek, I know firsthand that the Lightspeed Delta Zulu helps pilots like me with mild to moderate hearing loss hear the radio more clearly. But what about pilots with more advanced hearing loss who wear hearing aids? Can they wear hearing aids while using a Lightspeed headset?
We get this question regularly from pilots, and the answer is yes. You can wear your hearing aids when using an active noise-reducing headset. You may need to adjust the hearing aids prior to starting flight, something that most modern hearing aids can accomplish using an app on your phone. The extra computing power in our headsets can accommodate additional features as well, which can also benefit pilots who wear hearing aids. Our Lightspeed Delta Zulu headset, for example, has a hearing acuity feature, which puts a pilot through a 12-tone hearing test, the results of which are stored in the headset and adjust any incoming audio based on the pilot's customized hearing profile. This feature has helped many pilots hear the radio more clearly. The app that the test is done through also allows for multiple customized hearing profiles to be created, so a pilot can take the test with and without their hearing aids. If you plan on using your hearing aids during flight while also using your new hearing acuity profile, be sure to take the test while wearing your hearing aids. Or you could create a different profile without the hearing aids if you so choose. Even without a personalized hearing profile, an active noise-reducing headset will cancel out harsher background noises that, for some pilots, allows them to wear the headset without their hearing aids. We always recommend testing your headset with and without hearing aids prior to taking flight to ensure you feel confident receiving radio communications over the headset, as well as to ensure that the fit of the headset is comfortable when you are wearing your hearing aids in flight.
Derek, thanks for helping us make sure we hear the radio clearly so that hopefully we don't hear those words. Please advise when ready to copy a phone number.
Thank you, Max.
And now for a few updates. They say the devil is in the details, and that is very true in flying. And I want to tell you about 3 instances in which a small detail was overlooked. The first was a midair collision, and the other 2 were illegal flights that were proposed to me within 24 hours of each other this week by different pilots. The midair collision occurred on Saturday at the Hollister, California airport, which is close by. Fortunately, both pilots survived, though the Cirrus pilot was hospitalized with a broken ankle. Now, Hollister is a non-towered airport that I fly into often. It's quite busy, it's got a lot of glider operations, and there's a CAL FIRE air base there with air tankers that fight wildfires. The midair occurred when a Cirrus SR-22 was landing and a Vans RV-8 was taking off. According to FlightAware.com, the Cirrus was flying from Southern California and showed a destination of Monterey, California, and that it diverted to Hollister. Now, Monterey often has low clouds in the morning, so that's probably why it diverted. The aircraft appears to have flown straight into Hollister via the RNAV 31 approach. Initial reports are that the Cirrus made all of the appropriate radio calls, but that the Vans aircraft, which was based at Fraser Lake Airport, and that's a grass strip about 5 miles away, was not on the correct frequency and couldn't be heard at Hollister. There is a video that shows the crash that was taken by a pilot who said he was trying to warn the Vans pilot over the radio about the landing Cirrus. The video shows that as the Cirrus is landing, it passes over the Vans aircraft that was taking off and climbed up into the tail of the Cirrus. The Cirrus immediately fell to the ground and the van's aircraft landed in front of it. One factor involved was the runway 31 configuration, which is confusing to many pilots. Hollister has two crossing runways. Runway 31 is 6,350 feet long, and the crossing runway, runway 24, is 3,150 feet long. Sometime in the past, runway 31 was shortened. A document on the City of Hollister website says, quote, both runways 1331 and runways 624 have pavement areas in excess of their official runway length published by the FAA. For runway 1331, an 1,170-foot paved area extends to the south behind the runway 31 threshold. And then it talks about runway 24, which I'll skip ahead. It says, presently these paved areas are used for departure operations. While these pavement areas are the width of the remaining portions of the runway, these paved areas are marked and designated as taxiways. Using taxiways for departure operations is contrary to current FAA design standards. To be used for departure or landing, a pavement surface must be designated as a runway surface, be marked accordingly, and have met the safety area and object clearing standards. So here's what's confusing for pilots when the runway numbers are not at the end of the runway as they usually are. If you have white arrows on that first piece of pavement, you have what's called a displaced threshold, and you can take off, though not land, on that first part of the runway prior to the runway numbers. Or, if there are chevrons on that first part of the runway, you can't take off, land, or taxi on that part of the pavement. But there's a third configuration that's fairly rare, though it does exist at my home airport of Palo Alto and at Hollister. In these cases, the pavement leading up to the runway numbers doesn't have white arrows, it doesn't have chevrons. Instead, that area is for taxiing only. At Palo Alto, that portion is very short, and it's marked as a yellow center line that starts at the beginning of the pavement and leads up to the numbers, and it's just for taxiing up to the numbers, though frankly a lot of people start their takeoff roll there. At Hollister, it looks like that initial part of the pavement has a white center line, but no white arrows or chevrons, and it's fairly long at 1,170 feet. So people may think it's a displaced threshold, but according to the pavement markings, it cannot be used for takeoff. It can, however, be used for taxiing up to the runway numbers. The remarks for the airport say, quote, recommend pilots to begin runway 31 takeoff roll at or beyond the threshold past taxiway Bravo. Now note that it says recommend, but the markings at the beginning of the runway make it clear that you cannot use that portion of the runway for takeoff. In the video of the Midair, the Cirrus can be seen headed to a point that's beyond the numbers, and it's easy to see where the numbers are because of the flashing real lights in the video. It's also clear in the video that the van's aircraft is in the air and climbing before the runway numbers. So apparently it started its takeoff on the first part of the runway that is only for taxiing. So as we'll discuss in a moment, details matter. Had the van's pilot followed the recommended procedure and taken off at taxiway Bravo, which is just before the 31 numbers, it's unlikely this accident would have occurred. So remember, when you fly, no detail is too small, because the one detail you overlook can lead to an accident or a violation of the FARs. Now let's talk about the two situations that occurred earlier this week within 24 hours of each other, and both involve pilots asking me to perform illegal flights with them. Now for sure, one of them was inadvertent. I don't know for sure whether the second one was or not. Obviously, I didn't conduct either of the proposed flights. But I wanted to talk about both because as a pilot or as a flight instructor, you might find yourself in a similar situation in the future, and you might not even realize that a flight you plan is illegal. And I've encountered variations of both of these situations in the past, and neither of them is particularly rare. One involved documentation, and the other involved an illegal charter. Let's talk about the documentation first. And by the way, if you're thinking, well, Max, it's just paperwork, it's not a big deal, nobody's going to get killed flying an airplane with the wrong documentation, let me ask you this. What would happen if you were flying an expensive airplane, you had an accident, there was lots of damage, and you went to your insurance company and said, hey, please fix my airplane? And if they checked your documents and found that you didn't have a valid airworthiness certificate, could they deny your claim? Yeah, they certainly could. And when the FAA investigated your accident, regardless of how minor it was, would you be in trouble? Yes, you definitely would, because that would be a per se violation of 91.203, which says in part, no person may operate a civil aircraft unless it has within it, skipping ahead, an effective U.S. airworthiness certificate. So yes, correct paperwork is important. And I'm going to ask all of you to check the documentation the next time you fly. And of the thousands of you listening, I'm guessing that at least a dozen of you will contact me and say, good thing you mentioned this because I discovered my documentation wasn't correct and I was about to fly illegally in an unairworthy aircraft. So please commit to doing this right now. Commit to checking your documentation the next time you fly and contact me if it isn't correct. Now here's what happened. As part of my work, I sometimes fly with people who've recently purchased new Cirrus aircraft, whether it's a piston power SR-20 or SR-22 or the jet-powered Vision Jet. In the former case, often someone has purchased a plane that's far away and they hire me to fly with them to bring their new baby home. These are really fun trips for both of us, and the new owner gets a huge amount of instruction along the way home, so they find the trips really beneficial. In the case of the Vision Jet, it's a little different. It's often with a new owner, but usually we're flying for 25 hours together so that the newly type-rated pilot can get their required SOE time or supervised operating experience. Now in this case, a listener to the show who lives in New England had previously owned a Cirrus, and he'd just bought a 2023 Cirrus SR-22 a few weeks before, and he flew me out from California so that we could fly to some destinations in the Midwest and South that he planned to travel to often. By the way, one of the comments I loved was when he said he makes his kids listen to aviation news talk when they're traveling together in the car. Now I asked him how old the kids were, and, well, their ages were around 30. So kids, you're old enough now that if you don't want to listen to the show, you don't have to. Getting back to the trip, I got to say, getting to New England was a pain. There are no direct flights to the airport that I was going to, so I flew Southwest with a connection at Chicago's Midway Airport. Traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast takes all day. My flight left at 10 a.m., and if all went well, I would have arrived at 10:10 p.m. Although that's 12 hours, with the time change, it's 9 hours of my time. And it's part of the reason that when I do these trips, I also bill for my travel time. And if you're a CFI that travels, you should do the same as well. The trip to Midway was uneventful, but that's where the wheels started coming off the bus. We initially heard that maintenance was looking at our plane and we'd be departing an hour and a half late, which meant we'd arrive at 11:40 p.m. I could see someone in the cockpit wiggling the rudder back and forth and then turn the nose wheel 90 degrees right and then left, and that's when I started to have a bad feeling that I might be spending the night in Chicago. Sure enough, we were told that our plane was being taken out of service, but good news that there was another plane waiting for us at another gate. At the new gate, boarding started 2 hours late, which meant we'd be arriving at 12:10 a.m. Okay, still not terrible, but I like getting a good night's sleep before I have to fly all day with a client. After we boarded the aircraft, we sat for a long time with it fully boarded. We didn't push back, and there were no indications why we weren't hustling out to the runway. After about 20 minutes, we were told that maintenance was looking at something and we'd know more soon. A little while later, we were told that this second plane was also being taken out of service and that we'd need a deplane. But, miracle of miracles, they had a third plane available for us at the gate next to ours. Now, that really surprised me. We headed over there, but then I heard the pilot tell the gate agent that he might not be able to take the flight and we might need a new crew. Obviously, he was about to time out. All airlines have crews on reserve, but often the requirement is that they need to be able to get to the airport within 2 hours, which could mean a long wait for us. We were then given a new boarding time that was 4 hours after our original boarding time, which suggested we'd be landing after 2 a.m. As it turned out, there was another crew coming into Midway at the gate next to us, and they were asked to take our flight. So that third flight turned out to be the charm. We landed at 2:30 a.m., and I dashed to my hotel, and I was in my room at 3 a.m. Now, since I was coming in from the West Coast, that was just midnight my time, but I certainly wasn't going to get up at a normal time. I left periodic messages for my client and sent him a final one that said I'd call him when I woke up. I slept until about 10:30 a.m. and we met up at 11:30. We spent about 45 minutes talking about our upcoming flight, which would have taken us to the Midwest, after flying for a total of 5 hours with a fuel stop in the middle. When we got to the airport, we loaded our bags into the aircraft and pulled it out of the hangar. We then started going through the pre-flight inspection checklist. And item number 1 reads, A, required documents on board. My client read that and then went on to item 2, at which point I said, wait, let's look at the documents. So I pulled 5 pieces of paper from the plastic sleeve on my side of the center console and started sorting through them. In it, I found 2 registration cards, one with an old registration number and another with a current N number. There was also a 3rd piece of paper that documented that change and was dated January 2024, so about 18 months before our flight. I then looked at the airworthiness certificate, and it had the old registration number. I searched through the rest of the papers, and we couldn't find an airworthiness certificate with the new N number. That then led to an exhaustive search of the plane for the missing certificate, and a number of phone calls to the broker that had handled the sale of the plane, and the CSIP flight instructor who had been hired to deliver the plane from the seller to my client. The CSIP said that he thought we were probably okay because the airworthiness certificate had the correct aircraft serial number on it. Now, I burst out laughing when I heard that because it sounded like classic CYA to me. He promised to investigate further and call us back. He called back a few minutes later and admitted, yeah, he was wrong, and that an airworthiness certificate does have to have the current N number on it to be valid. So at this point, since we didn't have that certificate, we had an unairworthy aircraft that was illegal to fly. And since it was a Sunday, there was no way we were going to be able to contact an FAA FSDO to get a new certificate issued until the following day. So our plans to fly for 2 days fell apart at that point. Instead, we decided to spend several hours sitting in the airplane, running through checklists and talking about some of the nuances of flying the plane. And we agreed that I'd fly home the following day. Fortunately, my trip home the next day was uneventful, though it was another long day with over 9 hours of traveling with a connecting flight. So for my 3 days, I spent about half a day with the client, and I feel badly for him. He paid a lot to have me there for such a short time. And while I know there was a lot of value in the ground instruction, it wasn't how we'd planned to spend our time. After I got home, I heard how this entire situation came to be. The new owner wrote to me and said, quote, I hope your return travel was a little easier after many calls and hiring a DAR. Now that's a designated airworthiness representative. And he said he was a former FAA guy. I should have the corrected airworthiness certificate today. I will now start every checklist with a visual aero check. Prior owner had no clue he was flying unairworthy aircraft for 18 months. I submitted a NASA safety report documenting the issue. I wrote back, wow, I'm stunned. The prior owner probably flew with multiple CFIs in that time. And what did the broker say about this? And he wrote back, the broker, and by the way, I'm not mentioning here who that is, but they are one of the 3 brokers that handle most Cirrus sales in the U.S. He said that they scanned the docs last year. Owner decided to take off market, and during that time changed N number. The broker used old scans and only updated the logbook. Holes in the Swiss cheese lined up, and no one did what you did, Max, step 1 of the checklist. So the prior owner who changed the N number flew an unairworthy aircraft for 18 months. He undoubtedly flew with one or more flight instructors. The aircraft went through a pre-purchase inspection and nobody checked the airworthiness certificate. And a Cirrus CSIP instructor delivered the airplane without checking for an airworthiness certificate. And the new owner flew the airplane, and I believe he flew with a CFI in the new airplane before I got there. So all told, perhaps maybe 6 people in a row skipped item number 1 on the checklist and did not verify that the correct documents were on board the aircraft. The new owner mentioned multiple times that I was the only one who thought to do this the right way, the way it's supposed to be done, the way we teach student pilots on day 1 how to do it. Does that make me feel like the smartest guy in the room? No, certainly not. If anything, it left me feeling a little sad. If so many pilots and flight instructors are paying so little attention to this detail, what else are you missing? And you might ask, hey, have I ever failed to check for correct paperwork? Yes, of course, but usually that's in airplanes in which I do a lot of flying, so I already know that the paperwork is correct. And I'm certainly more diligent when I encounter new aircraft like this one that I haven't flown before. So let me ask you this. When was the last time you actually looked at the documents in the airplane you fly, and are you 100% sure that they are correct? Have you checked the airworthiness certificate and the registration to see if they both have the correct tail number? And have you checked the registration to verify that it hasn't expired? Please check these items the next time you fly. And if you find a problem with the paperwork, please send me a note and share your story. And now for the second story. While I was still in New England, I had a request for what was clearly an illegal charter. I probably get one request like this every year or two, and it's always from someone I've had little prior contact with. In this case, I got an email from someone who had first contacted me before they got their private, but who decided to learn to fly with someone else, and I've never flown with him. He emailed me to say that he'd finished his private, that he was working on a serious transition in his instrument rating, and that his current instructor was unavailable. And he wrote, I wanted to check in again to see if you might be available for a full-day lesson block this Wednesday. I'm looking to fly up to Oregon Wednesday morning and return Wednesday evening and build some cross-country IFR time plus more Cirrus time in the process. I replied in part, it might work, though I'd have to reschedule 2 recording sessions for my podcast. What is it you'll be doing in Oregon, and approximately what time are you thinking we depart from Oregon? And I asked about the return time because I was trying to figure out what was the primary purpose for this flight. Was it truly for flight instruction, or was it for some other reason? The reply was, I was thinking we would leave early morning, say around 7 a.m. I would spend the day at such and such, and he mentioned the resort, as a mentor for, and he mentions a program. There are great options if you were to spend the day there to relax, get food, and do some adventure activities, or perhaps record a podcast there. I'd like to leave after the dinner event, say wheels up around 8 p.m., heading back to the Bay Area later in the evening. So let's break this down. What was the primary purpose for this flight? Was it flight training? Or was the flight training incidental to the real purpose of the flight? We'd leave at 7 a.m., be gone for more than 13 hours. During that time, we would log about 3 hours of, quote, flight training. Is the primary purpose flight training? Clearly not. The purpose of the trip was to get to Oregon to attend a day-long event. I wrote back, I'm sorry I can't do this flight with you as you've described it. However, my friend can help you with it. What you described clearly falls into the FAA's definition of a charter flight, and I would be putting all my certificates at risk if I were to conduct this flight with you. My friend has a Part 135 charter certificate. Sorry I can't help you in this particular situation, but I work really hard to follow all the rules. Interestingly, fully 30% of fatal accidents involve pilots who violated at least one FAR on the flight. So I was trying to point out that this would have been an FAR violation, and it's serious. Do let me know if I can be of further help to you in some way in the future. And the reply I got back was, your friend said he is no longer actively instructing. I will look for other options, though of course if you have any in mind, I'd be grateful. So he didn't ask my friend for a charter flight. He continued to ask for flight instruction. So now it appeared that he had moved from perhaps not understanding what constituted an illegal charter to continuing to ask one after he'd already been informed that it's not legal. My final message was, the reason I sent you to him was not for instruction. Your request falls into the FAA's definition of a charter flight, and he has a charter company. Now, I get this was a low-time pilot who perhaps didn't understand the rules, but after I told him the rules, it appears he continued to seek an illegal charter. Some people just don't believe the rules apply to them, and frankly, I'm not interested in flying with them, because if they're willing to break one rule, they're probably willing to break other rules as well. And frankly, I don't want my name in their logbook if and when they end up in an accident. So I hope as a pilot you work hard to understand all of the FARs and that you do what I try to do, which is to never break an FAR. Frankly, I make it a game, and I'm willing to be occasionally inconvenienced by the rules that I'm following. Because if you're willing to break one rule, well, it becomes a slippery slope. Where do you draw the line between breaking just the bad rules that you don't like while following the good rules that you do like? Coming up next, my conversation with Tom Turner, all right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. Tom, welcome to the show. Great to see you again.
Thanks for having me back, Max.
Well, I understand you have a big announcement. Tell us about it.
Well, thanks, Max. The American Bonanza Society's Air Safety Foundation announced its award of the $500,000 Manuel Maciel Ruddervator Prize to SRS Aviation in Minnesota. The Ruddervator on a V-tail Bonanza is the flexible or moving part of the tail that controls both pitch and yaw. It does the elevator and the rudder action together. And the skins for these Ruddervators became unavailable about 5 years ago. And so using money from the Maciel Aviation Fund, which was a grant that ABS Air Safety Foundation competed for and won in 2008, we created a prize for the first company to design, certify, and put into production some method of repairing these Ruddervators to keep over 5,000 V-tail Bonanzas operable.
Let me ask you about what made this so difficult. I mean, I would imagine that people are listening going, hey, this is a skin for an aircraft. What's the big deal? Why is this so difficult? Explain to us what's different about these skins and why it's difficult for them to be manufactured.
All right. Well, the first thing is that the original skins were made of magnesium. And as it turns out, these new skins are magnesium as well. We didn't limit it to magnesium, but that was the medium that SRS used. And they were made of magnesium primarily because of the negative impact of so much weight so far back on the airframe. Elevators and rudders are heavy, Ruddervators are heavy, and Ruddervators have, more importantly, very unique balancing requirements because a rudder goes left, right. An elevator goes up, down. But a Ruddervator goes up and down for pitch, but they work in opposition to one another for yaw control. And so they flex tremendously, and they have to be balanced very precisely. Now, SRS Aviation has been producing aluminum replacement skins for the straight tail airplanes for decades. But they found that they could not meet the balance requirements. They couldn't get them to balance properly in aluminum. There was just too much weight involved. So they had to go back to a lighter medium. So that's one of the big issues. You can't just make this up out of aluminum and put it on the airplane like you could on an A36 or a Cessna 172 or something. As a unique aside, I know you're big in the Cirrus community. Balance is a big issue in the Cirrus airplanes as well. And you'll notice that the control surfaces on these all-composite Cirrus airplanes are actually made of aluminum. And that's apparently because of the challenges of balancing a composite structure. So it's somewhat similar. Now, one of the big reasons, really probably the big reason that Textron stopped producing its parts was because the grade of magnesium used is not used for much of anything else. It's a 020 thickness aluminum or magnesium, and nothing else in the world, nobody produces that thickness anymore. And so in order to acquire magnesium and be able to use it, they would have to mill off, they would have to grind off half of every sheet of magnesium before they could begin the process. SRS Aviation has that same issue going on, and that drives the cost. So that was one of the big things. The other more challenging issue is that in order to harden this magnesium to meet its certified strength as approved for Beechcraft way back when, they put this magnesium in a chemical bath. They soak it in a chemical that creates and makes it hard enough to be able to mill it and do its thing and to withstand the stresses of flight. And the chemical used in what was Beechcraft's approved process is so incredibly caustic, it's so environmentally unfriendly that almost no one in the world produces or uses that chemical anymore. So even if they do get the magnesium sheets and mill off half of the thickness of every sheet, they did not have their own approved process available on a wide scale any longer. That was always contracted out. Beech didn't do that. And they couldn't find anybody to do that. Well, eventually they found a very small quantity of that chemical, strangely enough, here in Wichita, and were able to get a small batch of control surfaces put out. And I think they're still working their way through that remaining chemical for what they're producing there. So we have a materials availability process, and we have the environmental impact of the production process that were two major obstacles to continued production of the parts.
Tell us about the model years involved, how many aircraft are covered in that time frame.
All right, well, there are the V-tail Bonanzas were produced from 1947 through 1982, and they were the most produced of the Bonanza derivative airplanes: Bonanzas, Debonairs, Travelairs, straight tails, and V-tails. The V-tails were the most numerous, with over 10,400 produced. There are, at best estimates, about half that number still registered in the U.S. and around the world. There are three distinct divisions or changes in the tail design over the years. So there is one Ruddervator design from 1947 through 1950, another one from 51 through 1963, and then the final design from 64 through the end of production in 82. And so they're very, very similar, but they are slightly different in design. And of the remaining fleet, under 1,000 remain of the very early designs, and then the other two are split about 50-50. So all told, a little more than 5,000 airplanes are potentially affected by the Ruddervator issue.
Okay, I got it. So tell us a little bit about SRS Aviation. Who are they, and how is it that they were interested in pursuing this?
Well, Dave Lauren is the owner of SRS Aviation, and as I said, they have been in the business of producing control surfaces for Beech and other types of aircraft for decades. And so actually, when we announced this prize, I contacted Dave and said, hey, we've got this prize. You might be one of the front runners if it's something you want to do. And initially, he didn't want to do it because he knew from his own experiments beforehand he could not produce Ruddervators in aluminum that would work on a V-tail. And he did some looking around and found that really there's very little expertise out there in creating aircraft-grade formed magnesium parts anymore. And so he backed off. And as he told us when we made the actual financial award, he eventually came to realize no one's going to do this, and he really loves these airplanes. And so he and his company spent almost 3 years basically creating the expertise necessary to be able to produce these parts. He said the best he could find was people that knew how to stamp out magnesium laptop cases. It's very light metal, so it's used in a lot of computer applications. But the problem is also that magnesium is extremely corrosive. And so that's one of the issues on airplanes. You have to really watch to make sure that the paint is intact so the metal itself isn't exposed. So anyhow, SRS Aviation created this expertise over time and eventually got to where they could confidently go to the FAA and gain approval. They also, in their approval process and through their research, were able to come up with a different method of hardening the material other than that caustic chemical bath. And so what they did was they really, from zero to expertise, they created a magnesium production process that gets the job done and was acceptable to the FAA for approval, and then they could go into production with it.
So this is a big deal if you can't get parts for your airplane and have to essentially throw it away. Why did the Ruddervator skins become unavailable?
Well, about 5 years ago, a little more than 5 years ago now, Textron Aviation, which owns Beechcraft, quietly stopped producing Ruddervator skins. Now, admittedly, there was never a huge demand at any one time for them, and sometimes Ruddervator replacements are available in the salvage market. So there was no immediate issue. However, there was a very public psychological impact. What if something happens to the Ruddervator on my airplane? I'll no longer have any way to repair it. And even minor damage from, hangar rash type accidents or corrosion, things like that, could potentially total an airplane. So there was a huge psychological impact and concern about the ongoing viability of the V-tail fleet. And this even spills over into other Bonanza and Baron models, because where the V-tail goes, the entire Beechcraft fleet goes. And so we started to see a negative impact on airplane sales, on the value of those airplanes that were sold, and even in some of the other designs, the straight tail airplanes, the Model 33s, the Model 36s, there was something of a reluctance among some people to purchase into that, not knowing what might happen next. So this was very different from some of the other situations that American Bonanza Society works on a regular basis, where we try to assure our members and Beechcraft owners have access to, we can hook them up with people that can provide parts of various sorts. This was different because this was now an existential crisis for these aircraft. If something happened to the Ruddervator, there was no way to fix it. We even saw some aircraft insurance companies add a provision to their policy that said, if you have Ruddervator damage, we will not total your airplane. In other words, they wouldn't give you the check for $150,000. But now you're stuck with an airplane that couldn't be repaired. So, of course, we started to talk to Textron Aviation about this. I'll come back to that in a minute. I've always been a big fan of Charles Lindbergh. And one of the motivations of Lindbergh to fly across the Atlantic was the Orteig Prize, which was $25,000, but that was in $25 when it was first put out. I believe it was in 25, and he flew in 27. And I thought maybe we could sponsor a prize. Now, back up just a little bit. ABS Air Safety Foundation participated in a 7-year engineering study related to minor cracking in the spar web, the carry-through spar area of Bonanzas, back in the 2003 to 2010 range. And we were able to, over time, participating in an engineering project, we were able to convince the FAA that there was not an airworthiness issue involved. And we did it by contracting with Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University's research team and others. And we spent about $300,000 on that. And what happened, what I found personally, was we do not, at American Bonanza Society, we don't have the staffing or the resources to directly participate in any sort of design or production process. We probably could have accomplished that spar web result with a lot less expenditure if we hadn't been trying to be part of the process ourselves and trying to manage it, and instead reward somebody else who does the management and the development of a product. And personally, I never wanted to get involved in that sort of thing again. And so when this came up, I proposed to our board of directors that we establish a prize. And at the time, I said $100,000 prize that basically starts a race. And whoever wins the race, whoever passes the finish line first with a certified product would get this prize. And our board, we talked about it briefly. As a matter of fact, they voted on it and they all thought it was good. And so we established this $100,000 prize about 4 years ago. And we got a lot of contacts from people who said, I'm interested in participating in this, but that's not very much money in the long run. It's going to cost a great deal more to certify something. And so after about a year where we really had no progress on that, the board and I, ABS Air Safety Foundation board and I discussed it, and we decided we're going to go all in on this. We have this Maciel Aviation Safety Fund Prize, which was a $1 million grant back in 2008. We hadn't used very much of it, and we were given that money to use it to promote the continued airworthiness of our fleet. So let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's put up $500,000 to see if that's enough to convince some of these interested parties to pursue this project and for someone to eventually successfully market a new product. In addition to the $500,000 that we allocated from the Air Safety Foundation, several ABS members asked if they could personally add to that amount in order to increase the incentive for a solution to be found. And ultimately, $28,110 additional dollars were added to that. So the total value of the Maciel Ruddervator Prize when it was awarded was $528,110. And we added, because of that great amount of money, we added some provisions that we didn't have originally. The first was that it needs to be certified for all three different iterations of the aircraft. In the previous prize, we said if you solve it for one of those three divisions of aircraft types, that's good enough. In this case, it had to be something that would be viable for all V-tail Bonanza owners. And the second thing, and I think probably the most important thing, is obviously certification is a requirement. But the most important thing is that we established a requirement that the winner has to have produced at least 100 completed kits before they would be eligible for the prize. And the reason for that is we didn't want to fund a science project. We didn't want somebody's book report to be, this is how I would make them. If we were going to put up that kind of money, we wanted to make sure that we had a company that was not only able to certify a viable replacement, but that they also had invested in the product production and support necessary to make this an ongoing concern. Furthermore, we knew that even $500,000 wasn't going to cover everybody's complete expense to do this. We didn't want it to. We wanted to augment what it cost for somebody to invest in this capability, but we wanted to make them dependent on the continued sale of kits to be able to recoup their total investment. We didn't want to have somebody collect the check and retire to the Caribbean, right? So we established this $500,000 prize. One interesting thing that happened as a result was that about 6 months after that, I received a phone call from Textron Aviation, and they said, we know we're not eligible for your prize because your prize specifies an alternative to the original design. But you've convinced us that we want to put out at least a limited production of Ruddervator skins because you're serious about keeping these airplanes operating. So on a limited basis, Textron resumed producing Ruddervator skins. But we were committed to the prize. We wanted to make sure that we had an ongoing support network for the owners of these airplanes. And ultimately, SRS Aviation met all of the requirements. And in a site visit at the end of April of this year, we determined they were eligible for, and we awarded the Maciel Prize.
Oh, this is a great story of perseverance and just trying to keep this fleet alive. Tell us a little bit about the donor, Manny. Who was he, and how is it that he ended up donating money for aviation?
Well, it's an interesting story. The story I'm told is that he was a rather reclusive aircraft fueler at Santa Rosa, California, and over his lifetime squirreled away a fairly large amount of money that no one really knew about. But when he passed away, he left a will, and in that will, he left $5 million of aviation safety research money in a grant program. And Manny had no connection to the American Bonanza Society that we are aware of. The executor of his estate, however, was a member of the American Bonanza Society. And he contacted us and said, hey, there is this aviation safety research fund out there available. We, ABS Air Safety Foundation, were in the throes of this spar web investigation I described earlier at the time, which was obviously costing some money. And he said, you might be able to apply for and get some of this $5 million. And ultimately, the $5 million was awarded by the Maciel estate. We earned $1 million of it. The AOPA at the time, AOPA Air Safety Foundation, now Air Safety Institute, earned $1 million of it. As I understand it, they put a large amount of that into aging pilot research. And $3 million of that went to the Flight Safety Foundation, which is mainly an air transport category safety-related organization. But we got $1 million for that. There were certain restrictions on the fund. We clarified those restrictions with the estate over time so that we could use it for things that promote the continued viability of our fleet. And consequently, we had some money available to put toward this particular cause.
Tom, great story. Thanks so much for sharing it with us today. And remind everyone, where do people go to find out more about the American Bonanza Society?
Okay, we're at bonanza.org, and we're based in Wichita, Kansas. If you're a beach owner or enthusiast, look us up and come on by if you're in this part of the country.
Will do. Thanks so much, Tom. And my thanks to Tom Turner for joining us here today. You can read more about his newsletter and about his work at mastery-flight-training.com, and I'll include a link to that in the show notes. And just a reminder that I love hearing from you, and I read many of your emails on the show. If you'd like to send me a message, just go out to aviationnewstalk.com, click on Contact at the top of the page. That's absolutely the best way to send me a message. And of course, I also want to thank everyone who supports the show in one of the following ways. We love it when you join the club and sign up at aviationnewstalk.com/support to support the show financially. You can also do that at aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. We also love it when you leave a 5-star review on whatever app that you're listening to us on now. And of course, if you're in the market for a headset, please consider buying a Lightspeed headset and using one of the links in our show notes, because if you use those links, they will donate to help support the show. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up. And remember that you can always go around.